Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe. Slide decks from the presenters are going to be available below. Thanks for watching.
Hello, everyone. Hello. Love to hear some great conversation leading into the presentation here. But we are going to get started here. Thanks for bearing with us for the technical difficulties there. But today we're going to be talking about the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program. It's a tri-county effort here in the Portland Metro. We're just going to start by introducing ourselves and kind of the parties that we represent. My name is Jack Spaeth. I work for New Narrative. I'm in our Landlord Liaison Program. Thanks there.
Morning. My name is Pranita, Assistant Supervisor for the Regional Long-Term Rent Services Programs. The microphone's not working.
Try it again. Try talking again.
Okay. Can you, oh, there we go. Sorry. Do you want to try again? Here.
Okay.
We'll have Bernice do it again for those on Zoom.
Yes. Good morning. My name is Pranita Streb. I am the Supportive Rental Assistant Supervisor for our Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program, or RLRA, and I also do the Homeless Services programs.
And I'm Jake Kirsch. I use he, him pronouns, and I work for the Housing Development Center. Our role in RLRA is the Risk Mitigation Program component, and we've been overseeing a similar risk mitigation pool for the Portland Housing Bureau for, I think, since 2008, 2009. I'm looking at my colleague over there. And that's how we got tied in with the counties to then administer a similar program for RLRA.
Hey everyone, my name is Casey Kunzat. I use he, him pronouns. I'm currently an RLRA Landlord Liaison at New Narrative. I work alongside Jack, and yeah, we're just helping support Multnomah County landlords and service providers be able to provide for the RLRA voucher. So there's been a lot of different kind of presentation and panel types. And so kind of for our presentation, what we're planning on doing is just kind of running through our slides. If you do have questions kind of through the presentation, we'd love to just kind of engage in a dialogue. And so if things do come up, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll try to get a mic to you and get that question answered, or just repeat the question if that's easier. But to start, so we're going to really just kind of go over what exactly is RLRA. It's a voucher program across the three counties, and kind of talk about why this program was developed, kind of touching on those points of local, long-term, and some market rate voucher, making it a little unique in comparison to other vouchers, how it works, kind of who pays for what, just kind of that administrative piece of like what exactly or how exactly this voucher works, and then why it works, really focusing on the supportive housing services, and that being a requirement of the voucher, and so participation with service providers for those housing voucher recipients is a requirement there, and then we'll kind of go into kind of the support that we offer to property managers, landlords, and then some of those service providers as well, with the risk mitigation program, and then as well the landlord liaison partnership program. And to start here too, we'll just kind of give you kind of a little bit of the scale of the program. You can also kind of reference those flyers that are each of your tables to kind of just emphasize kind of the scope and the reach of this program. It's a relatively new program starting after the pandemic here, kind of 2021. And just in this last year, $40 million of rent was distributed through this program. Over 3,000 housing vouchers were utilized, and the total properties that were just leased just in this last year was over 1,200. And so really, really emphasizing that property owners, developers, property managers are going to be seeing this housing voucher. And that'll kind of, that picture will kind of come clear as we continue here. And then I'm going to pass it off to Bernice here to talk about why RLRA.
Good morning. Thank you. Okay, so why RLRA? RLRA is our local long-term rent assistance program, voucher program for RLRA is our long-term rent assistance program through the tri-county, so Washington County, Multnomah County, and Clackamas County. RLRA promotes housing choice voucher or housing choice by allowing our participants to search for units within their affordability limits and FMR, which is our fair market rates across the three counties. And then included with that is that it provides those wraparound services for our participants, right? So they're going to be coming out of homelessness. We understand that there's barriers with those homelessness, and so the wraparound services are provided by the agencies to assist with that. The program also has some incentives for our landlords because, again, we know we're dealing with a vulnerable population. And so we kind of get some incentives out there to the landlords to assist with getting those individuals housed. And we'll talk about that later on in the slides. Okay. Okay, so why was RLRA developed? It was locally funded through the measure. That measure went through in 2020, and we started implementing the rent assistance program in 2021. It is a long-term program. It is set through for 2030, but hopefully it will be extended for our population. It also has like I said, market rate accessibility, so our participants are able to go out and search for units as long as it stays within 120% of the fair market rent. It does require supportive services in the onset. So again, we're pulling those people out of homelessness, and then we are providing those wraparound services to help them become self-sufficient and stable. And talked about the incentives for participating properties. That's the landlord liaison and the risk mitigation fund. And our support, it's population A and B, which I will give you those definitions of population A and B. So population A are our households that have income with less than 30% of the area median income, or AMI. They typically have a disability. They are or were previously homeless or at imminent risk of homelessness, and they are being provided the homeless or like they were using some sort of homeless services or experienced long-term homelessness. And what that means is, like, you could have somebody who was incarcerated and they're coming out and they have those services. They could go through the matching system and potentially be eligible for a program. You could also be fleeing domestic violence or any other sort of life-threatening service. So if you kind of meet those different criteria, then you're going to fall under population A. Population B will meet some of the criteria, but not all of those criteria. And so they still, I think their area median limit is able to go up a little bit higher. They don't necessarily have to have the 30% AMI or the disabling condition, but they still meet some of these other criteria like the homelessness or fleeing domestic violence or other life-threatening situations that could have them eligible for the program. And then lastly, how does someone get a voucher? Well, they'll use our coordinated entry system. So all 3 counties have their coordinated entry system. They will go through and do what is called a phase 1 assessment. That assessment just determines whether they are eligible for, like, which programs that they are eligible for. And one of those programs is the RLRA program. When they will be matched with the service provider at that time. When they are matched with the service provider, then they will also be assigned a housing navigator or a case manager. I think in Washington County, we just call them case managers. And then they will apply for the RLRA voucher program. It's a pretty low barrier program, so most people who apply for it do qualify. And then the housing navigator will also assist the applicant with looking for units that meet their affordability and getting them in there, possibly using landlord incentives to do that. And then the role of the case manager is providing those wraparound services.
So as a police kind of inferred in a couple different areas, each county is responsible for managing this program, and each county does it a little differently. But there are a few consistencies that go kind of across the 3 counties. And I'll kind of touch on some of those things here, kind of the overarching kind of policies of the voucher and kind of those kind of practical pieces, kind of who pays what, how that gets done, the paperwork that that would need to be completed. And so each of the programs is managed by the housing authority in each of the county. And I'm going to speak a little specifically to Multnomah County. That's the county that I work in and I know best. And so it's Home Forward in Multnomah County here. And those rent portions and here we can see that the highest a participant will pay is at 28.5% of their income. We know that HUD says that 33% of your income is kind of the maximum that someone should be paying in terms of rental affordability. And so that's capped at that 28.5. They also receive a subsidy for their utility payments. And so that's either just deducted kind of from that portion there, or many participants, as you can see on the flyer there, around 40% of participants have no income at all. And so they receive a utility subsidy directly that's kind of based off the expected utility costs at the property. And then as well, participants without a portion, they do not pay, participants without an income do not pay a portion at all. So the entirety of their rent is covered by the housing authority, paid directly from the housing authority to the property manager, like an ACH transfer. And then there on the right-hand side, you can kind of see the award letter. This is Home Forward's award letter, so used in Multnomah County here. And what this will do is just establish for the household how much, what's the total rent for a unit that they can rent. As Pernille said, that's 120% of the area market rent. And so these limits are high. Really one of the main focuses of this voucher is to provide choice to participants, to those recipients, so they can really use this voucher to go anywhere in Multnomah County, in Washington County, and Clackamas County. And then we'll go next here to, this also, I'll mention household sizes too. The vast majority of our households are single individuals, but increasingly we are starting to see folks with families, folks with adult children that would be living with them. And so we're seeing here that we're mostly renting out 1 bedrooms or and studios, but we're starting to see that number of 2 bedrooms and 3 bedrooms increase. And probably in the future here, we'll expect that continue to go up. And then here's some more of those documents. We all love these, don't we? So we have our RFTA. This is the request for tenancy approval. This is just a document that establishes the unit characteristics, the kind of the things going on at the property, the rent amounts, utilities, who the owner of the property is. And then we have the lead-based paint disclosure. This is a super common document, actually, almost in every single lease that you will see nationwide. I'm pretty sure the federal government requires it for most properties. And so this is a super common document, but this is just kind of an added layer of due diligence to make sure that that's included. And then lastly, you have the RLRA contract. And so this is kind of the final piece right as you're getting up to the point of lease signing, where you would sign the RLRA contract with the housing authority. This establishes payments and just kind of sets the expectations for the property manager, so they know what they're kind of getting, what they know what they're getting into in terms of processing and receiving payments, or kind of all the fun logistics that our property managers go through. And then touching on supportive services. And so this is really kind of what we see as why RLRA has been so successful. You can see that over 90% program retention rate after 1 year of being in the program. And so this is, as you saw from the kind of population A and population B, these are extremely vulnerable members of our community. These are people who often really need to work on kind of building trust with kind of outside organizations or whoever they may be working with. And these supportive services are really our service providers across the 3 counties. There's more than 50 of them, and they do amazing work. And so just a little paragraph here. Supportive services promote housing stability, community connection, and well-being through assertive case management. This includes housing navigation, income generation, legal assistance, and health and wellness support. And so these really are kind of those fundamental goals of those supportive housing service providers, to work with those participants, to work with these housing voucher recipients, to be able to generate additional income, whether that be through assistance or through employment, whatever that looks like for this individual. One thing that service providers really emphasize is just this idea of a participant-driven program, that participant, that voucher recipient, is in the driver's seat, and they are making the decisions about, again, where they want to live, and how they're interacting with the program. And these supportive services are a required piece to this, but engagement really does vary kind of per service provider, and then as well per individual that is receiving this housing voucher. And so it really does look different. We have a really wide variety of participants, even though we kind of have narrow windows of what this populations are. There really is a true diversity in who we're serving. And then, as I mentioned, over 90% program retention rate after about a year in the program. And so we're really, really excited to see that. As we said, this is a new program. We're really starting to kind of work on building up this data to be able to kind of understand how the program is working and what results we're seeing. And so again, kind of at the kind of practical level of what these housing navigators, caseworkers are really doing it's just, if you're a renter, you're familiar with the process. You're going out and touring apartments. You're submitting applications. A lot of the time too, a lot of participants have barriers, whether that be credit history, financial history, thinking about that screening criteria that those property managers are using to get folks into their property. And so a lot of what they can be doing are writing third-party letters of support and really trying to navigate additional resources. There's some really great community resources and community partners that our service providers partner with to expunge criminal records or working with a different provider to provide additional letters of support if they do have support through another third-party agency. There's a lot of coordination and collaboration between our service providers and other community partners. And then I also will comment culturally specific. Like I said, there's over 50 organizations across the 3 counties who are providing these services, and a lot of these programs are designed specifically for the culture of that participant, and they can speak very specifically to the needs of those participants. And then the flexible funds. So all the organizations have access to a fantastic pool of money to pay for past housing debt, past utility debt, even credit card debt, or whatever it may be. Like I was kind of talking about with those barriers, they have access to these funds to basically just pay for these barriers to be removed and to allow these people to get into housing that otherwise that they would never have been able to. And renters insurance as well. Renters insurance is a major sticking point for our property managers. They are very, very concerned and want every single one of our participants to have renters insurance, and that is an eligible cost for each of the counties for those service providers to be able to purchase renters insurance. Again, we always, I always want to ask our participants if they want renters insurance, and some will decline, and that's totally okay. There is an Oregon statute that says if someone is below 50% area median income, they are not required to have renters insurance. And so that's just a general rule. That's not specifically for RLRA. That's an Oregon state statute. And then lastly, we really like to emphasize especially to our property managers and partners, that there's a really broad net of support for the RLRA system. Like Casey and I at the Landlord Liaison Program, and then Washington County and Clackamas County also have a Landlord Liaison Program to serve property managers and property owners. And then as well, it's a good tee up for Jake here. The Risk Mitigation Program offers $5,000 to property owners in the case of property damage or operational loss. Kind of with that, I will pass off to Jake here to talk more specifically about the risk mitigation program.
Hi, everybody. Can I get a quick show of hands? Are there folks in the audience today who are actually working with RLRA vouchers already, or these are mostly to learn about? So 50-50. So I'm going to cover kind of 5 high-level questions about the risk mitigation program component of RLRA. The first being, what is it? It is available to any landlord renting to a household with a tenant-based RLRA voucher or with a project-based RLRA voucher at their property within the metro boundaries for the 3 counties. As I mentioned in my intro, HTC's role is to administer the risk mitigation program component on behalf of the county. And we've been doing similar work with the Portland Housing Bureau for a number of years. The second and probably the most common question is what does it actually cover? Before I get into what it will cover and what it won't cover on the next slide, I want to emphasize the fact that the risk mitigation program component of RLRA was designed to help with one of RLRA's big goals, is to not only get folks with the most barriers to housing housed, but keep them stable in their housing. So with that in mind, as you're working with RLRA vouchers, as you may work with RLRA vouchers in the future, there is no requirement that a tenant has left a unit before the RMP can be accessed. In fact, we really encourage and would like to increase the utilization of the risk mitigation program while folks are in their housing to help keep them in their housing. So if that's being able to avoid an eviction, if that's being able to avoid debt on their part or lease violations, this is a tool to help do that. So please keep that in mind when I'm telling you the ins and outs of what it will and won't cover. There are two main categories of expenses that it will cover, physical damages and operational losses. On the physical damage side, this is pretty much almost everything besides normal wear and tear or turnover costs if tenant has left the unit. So that's everything from excessive cleaning at a unit if somebody's left of the unit, hauling, debris removal, that kind of thing if somebody has left a unit. Although keep in mind that those two places are a place where if somebody's in a unit, you have to make repairs to a unit, they haven't left. We'd like them not to leave the unit, but you need to do some hauling of excess items in order to actually be able to do the repairs. That could be eligible. And then the big thing would be actual repair and replacement of items that you don't typically have to repair or replace during tenancy. So that runs the gamut from refrigerators that a tenant has broken to countertops, to windows, to walls. But keep in mind that the damage has to be the result of the actions of that household using an RLRA tenant-based voucher or living in a project-based RLRA unit or a guest of that household. So I like to use the example, unfortunately, of a stove fire that happens, unfortunately, somewhat frequently at properties that sets off a sprinkler system. And then the ensuing water damage, obviously, sometimes can be quite extensive, but there's often going to be some damage related to that. That would be a clear case of the actions of that household or somebody that was a guest of that household causing the damage. But on the flip side, if you have a burst pipe in the wall that causes flooding damage that's due to deferred maintenance or faulty plumbing, that would not be the fault of the tenant and thus would be eligible to come for reimbursement from the RMP. And similarly, I'd like to use also that stove fire example for what we call multi-unit claims. So there is the possibility if damage is done and more than the unit in question is damaged, then up to 5 total units can be included in a claim. So again, that stove fire example with water damage is unfortunately one of the ones we've seen thus far, where surrounding units are often damaged as well. Common areas can also be included in that. Again, that damage has to be the result of the actions of that household. And if you do end up in a situation in which common areas or exterior, something outside the unit is damaged, we'll need some evidence. A stove fire is pretty straightforward when you see the documentation, the invoicing, what caused it and what all was damaged. But if there's an incident that's not in the unit, we need some evidence that it was that tenant who caused the damage. So it's pretty easy when the damage is in the unit. It's not so easy if, like, for example, we had one claim already where somebody ran into a light pole in the parking lot of the property, took it down, and it needed to be fully replaced. So in that case, the claimant was able to provide a police report when the police showed up that allowed us to tie that tenant with the tenant-based RLRA voucher to the damage. On the operational loss side of things, the big one to know about is 90 days worth of the tenant's rent if they're unable to pay it. It is capped at 90 days because the RMP itself was not designed to be another form of ongoing rent assistance. But if the tenant is unable to pay for up to 90 days, that can be included. If
On tenant-based vouchers, if you have excessive amount of time that it takes to turn a unit after somebody leaves, that amount of time, because you won't be getting your rental subsidy from the housing authority after a tenant's already left, that could be an eligible item to come to the RMP for. Similarly, on project-based units, if turnover takes more than 60 days, or if your housing authority takes more than 60 days to get you a new qualified tenant into the unit, that could be an eligible item as well. Things like lease break fees, utility fees, late fees, those are all eligible items under operational loss. There are a couple categories of operational losses that require some caveats. One is legal fees. We do see this program as hopefully trying to prevent evictions, as I mentioned before. But we also recognize that there are times where an eviction or having the tenant leave the property is necessary. If that's the case, legal fees could be eligible items. We will ask you for information on the steps that were taken to avoid that. So we're not wanting to encourage property owners to go straight from a situation to evicting, some sort of payment plan or corrective action plan, that type of thing. So what won't be covered, again, as I mentioned, normal wear and tear, so spot cleaning of carpets, spot touch-up painting after somebody has left, those kind of typical things, if somebody has left a unit, wouldn't be eligible. Again, damage that's not caused by the tenant with the RLRA voucher, common area are impacted, unfortunately, you'll be capped at those five. On the operational loss side of things, increase to insurance premiums are not eligible. I will say, and I didn't note that before, that your insurance deductible could be an eligible item. If you do have a big incident where you're not going to be able to get the full amount reimbursed from the RMP and you go through your insurance, but you have a deductible, your deductible could be an eligible item up to the limits that I'll get to in a second here. The cost of supportive services should be coming from somewhere else within the SHS program. So supportive services are not an eligible item. And neither for anybody who has any project-based RLRA units at their property. If you're doing an initial lease up, any amount of lost rent during the initial lease up is not an eligible item. So the limits, as I think Jack mentioned a few minutes ago, on the tenant-based side of things, that limit is $5,000. And that's a per claim limit, and that's a per tenancy maximum for the tenant that's using that voucher at that property. So what that means on the claim side of things, there's no actual limit on the amount of claims that you can make, although we would ask that folks don't submit claims for $10 here, $10 there, but you can, up to the $5,000 limit, you can submit as many claims as you need to. But once you hit $5,000 for that tenant while they're living at that property, then that is the maximum. So for the tenant, that means if they take that voucher and move to a different property, their new property owner, property management company would have access to $5,000 while they're living at that property. And for the property owner, if that tenant leaves with the voucher and they choose to rent a unit or that unit to another household using an RLRA tenant-based voucher, they would have access to up to $5,000 during the tenancy of that new tenant. As I mentioned, the multi-unit claims. So how we handle those is each unit involved in the claim, up to 5 units, has access to up to $5,000, assuming that the damage is significant enough to reach that $5,000 limit. So on a worst case scenario in terms of damage to multiple units, you could potentially access up to $25,000 related to a tenant-based RLRA voucher. Is there anybody in the crowd here that's actually working with project-based RLRA at this point? Okay, yep, I'm on to two. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. I know Liz knows this, and Amanda, you probably know a little bit about this, and we can talk offline if you need to. The claims maximums and the if you do end up working with a project-based RLA unit, and the property lifetime limit are much different than the tenant-based side. As you see here, the maximums for the claims have to do with the type of unit involved. So SRLs all the way up through 4+ bedrooms have different maximum amounts. And again, if you end up in one of those multi-unit claim situations, then we would calculate the total based on what units are involved and what the limit is for each of those units. The lifetime, so there isn't a lifetime, as I said, it's a per claim and per tenancy situation for tenant-based vouchers, but for project-based vouchers, there is a lifetime limit for the property. So we don't envision that too many folks are going to sign up to have one project-based RLA unit at their property. Typically, it's going to be more than one, in which case the lifetime maximums are calculated based on the type of units involved and these totals you see here added together, and then that's how you would get to what your property's lifetime limit is. If you are working or do work with project-based RLA units, please know that you do not have to keep track of this. We will keep track of this, and we will tell you if you are going over your lifetime limit, but I want to make sure people have that information. And then how do you access it? Right now, there's the URL to the web page on HTC's website, my contact information. At the web page, there is a claim form that has a tab on it that tells you all the additional documentation that we need in order to process the claim. And then there's also a portal on that same page that you can then upload the documentation and the claim form and send it into us for processing. I do want to note that the documentation slide that Jack had that included the RLRA agreement for rent assistance, the ARA, on the tenant-based side of things, that's the document that we need to know for sure that it's an RLRA voucher that we're dealing with and not a different type of voucher. So unfortunately, that's been if property management is typically making the claims right now, it's usually coming through property management companies, and because that ARA is signed between the housing authority and the property owner, sometimes it is the property management company that signs it, but often it's also the owner. We're encountering quite a bit of situations where folks can't find that ARA. So we're working with the counties right now to figure out ways we might be able to streamline that process a little and perhaps maybe even get the ARAs from the county. But I just want folks to know that if somebody's going to be submitting a claim on your behalf, that is a very important document to make sure they have access to. But other things are, invoicing, tenant ledger, that kind of stuff, the lease for the tenant as well. I do want to mention before I pass it off to Casey that the timeline. So unfortunately, the process for getting a payment once the claim is approved does require HDC to invoice the counties. We can only do that once a month. So depending on when you submit your claim, when we get all the information we need, and when your claim is approved, your claim will go on an invoice to that county at the middle of the following month. And then we receive funds back from the counties, at which point we can make the payment to you. So I want to throw that in there and make sure to tell people that, because it's not an instantaneous, you have an approved claim and then 2 days later, you're going to get the money. There will be that processing time, but we will be able to provide you an approval letter that confirms that you will be getting those funds. So that's important when it comes to the tenant retention and the stabilization component, that you'll know it's not technically a promissory note, but it's almost like a promissory note where it's like you've been approved. It's just a matter of us getting the funds and being able to either electronically transfer them or cut the check to you. So if there are any questions now, I can take them, but we can also save them for the end. I think we will have plenty of time for questions. So I will Oh, got a couple. All right. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm realizing we're supposed to, thank you, Aaron. People online can't hear you and I missed the beginning of your question, so. Is the other, can you turn the other mic on?
You can. We have a secondary mic on.
Yeah, it's not on.
Just, do you find that landlords are pretty receptive to a month and a half turnaround time on getting those funds? And what kinds of issues have you had with that process? I'm just curious.
It's obviously not ideal. I think the approval letter kind of being, like I said, that promise that the money's there. When we have encountered situations in which folks are frustrated with that timeline, we've been able to get them to the point of, okay, well, I know I'm not going to have the money when I get that letter, but I know I will be getting it. So we've had luck there. I think all in all, even if there's a decent amount of time that can pass in there, for a lot of situations, it's still no worse than if you were to go through your insurance company. That's not going to take 2 days either. So, yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you, but.
Hi. You might not know the answer to this, but if you had a project with project-based RLRA vouchers and PHP funding and OHCS funding, and they all have RMPs, how does the owner or the property manager know which organization to apply for? Or have you guys worked out a deal on the side?
Well, that question is much easier to answer when it relates to the overlap between the RMP and PHP. And Aaron handed you that mic, and Aaron has worked on this quite extensively. So there are a number of properties that do have that overlap. We've now been able, for some of them, at least I think, Aaron, all the ones that are online thus far, I might say, speaking that correctly, they now have access to the RLRA RMP, not the PHP RMP. I think that includes at least one home photo property, but I'm not remembering all the properties off the top of my head. On the HCS side, there's still some coordination that we'll need to keep. We've had dialogue with them, but we need to keep that going to be able to minimize that confusion, because there probably will be some of those situations. They're more than I'm more than happy for them to come to me, and I can facilitate that dialogue if there is any confusion.
Thanks.
I think there was.
So you mentioned regarding when a tenant moves from it moves into the property, the risk management, $5,000 stays with them at that unit at that property.
Yeah.
So would that also apply? So if they're there for 1 year, 4 years, 5 years, is that same $5,000 amount?
It's total for the whole tenancy. It doesn't matter how long they live there. So that $5,000 will not reset with a lease renewal.
But it resets if they move properties. So it would incentivize them potentially to move if they're using those funds. If they have to use those funds, it would be beneficial for them to actually move to a different property to reestablish access to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess in theory, we haven't seen that yet. Okay. But that is a good point to bring up. And I will say that the policies for the program were developed before it rolled out, but there was an acknowledgement and understanding that there will need to be updates to those policies. And that may be a question that we need to tackle.
Since it follows the unit and not the person themselves.
Well, it follows them to another property, but So the other component of that is that if they move to a different unit at the same property, it doesn't reset either. And that was, I believe, an intentional component of this to try to not incentivize landlords for, hey, I maxed out my 5,000. I'm going to make you move to that unit so I can get access to another 5,000. That's not to say that, but when it comes to the tenant choice, a lot of this is about, and I think on the service side of things and the RLRA program in general, so much of it is about tenant choice. And if a tenant chooses to leave, we wanted to make sure that that new property would have access to. But I hear your question and concern about, does that incentivize them to
It's
move?
more from a perspective of the landlords, if they ask that kind of question, making sure that we're advocating that the program is not made and designed to be abused, but more to advocate and uplift the person who's living there.
Correct. Yeah. Was there another question?
That
down here?
answered my.
Okay, awesome. There was one more over here. Oh,
Hi, I was just curious as to when those dollar limits were set, and is there any inflationary adjustments that take place?
The dollar amounts were set when the policies were developed and those policies were finalized. I'm looking at my colleague Liz because she worked on the policies. Was that 2022? Okay. There is no automatic inflation adjuster worked into the policies. That being said, I think as we analyze the policies and get input from stakeholders on the policies, the dollar amounts will be something that comes up. Ultimately, it will be up to the counties to decide whether or not they want to change the policies, which would include the dollar amount limits. But those, I imagine, will be part of recommendations that make their way there, because it was based on a couple of years ago, and I believe it was based on the $5,000 that the state's housing choice voucher landlord guarantee program. I'm not sure I'm getting that right, but that was already existing at the time, and I don't think they've increased that number either in quite a few years.
In addition to any security.
If you're using the security deposit, yes, we back that out.
It's not. On top of the security deposit.
Yeah, if the security deposit is being used, I mean, that being said, one, they don't have to move out. You won't use a security deposit if somebody's currently staying in the unit. And then if the RMP can cover you so that the security deposit can then move with the tenant if they're leaving or have already left, then that's fine too. We just need to know if you've already applied it to any of the funds. There was.
Thanks so much for your presentation, everybody. I really appreciate it.
And there's still a little bit, sorry to step on Casey, we still have a time.
Sorry, Casey. Okay, so I just two questions. Are you seeing the RMP being used often for renters insurance? And then what other evidence are you accepting for damages that are occurring outside of the RLA units? The example you gave with the police report is kind of an easy one, right?
Yeah.
You have that definite thing, but I'm sure there's a lot of gray area there. So I'm just interested what you're seeing there. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and thank you for that question, because I should have said that one. Because that is an easier one than a lot of them, right? So I'll take that part first. We wrestled with this quite a bit. It's not in the policies, so this is a procedural thing on our part right now. Ultimately, we realized that something like a signed witness affidavit from a third party, ultimately, when it comes down to it, if it's a tenant says they didn't cause the damage, property management or property owner says they did cause the damage, the burden of proof is on the property owner, not the tenant, to prove that they didn't do it, right? So we need some third party saying, yes, we saw that occur. We cannot adjudicate. We're not a court, nor do we want to be. So we can't adjudicate the way a court might. So ultimately, in a lot of situations, that would be the main way that you could provide enough evidence for us to feel comfortable reimbursing that. On the renter's insurance, no, that is not, the transaction is between HDC administering on behalf of the counties and the property owner or their authorized representative. So anything that the tenant is paying directly wouldn't be something that a property owner could come to the RMP for reimbursement for. So that's where those flexible funds from other parts of the RLRA program would come in, and hopefully the case management folks working with your tenant could get them renter's insurance that way. Yeah. Awesome. All right, I'm going to pass it off to Casey. Sorry, Casey, for taking up so much time.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. So I'm going to introduce the landlord liaison tri-county coordination and just a little bit more about how our property partnership works, as well as just what the landlord liaison team does. So the big part of it is every single county, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington, they all have a landlord liaison program. We're here to both support and also maintain relationships throughout the counties. So I'm going to use two words a lot in this like slide is relationships and support. And those are the two main things that we're focusing on in the landlord liaison team. The big part about our relationships is we really want to maintain both relationships with our landlords and our supportive service housing providers. We're also trying to develop more relationships as well as leveraging some of those relationships that our service providers are developing with some of those landlords in the community. We definitely have a lot of different service providers that we like to support. And with our services, we're able to provide just an extra layer and be able to answer any questions about the RLRA system. As evidence from this presentation so far, there's some levels of complexity to the system, and we're also there to be able to answer any questions about the RLRA. I like a term that Jack likes to use a lot is we're the hub for all things RLRA. We like to provide support, like I said previously, to both the landlords, property owners, and managers, as well as any supportive housing service providers. The big question is what types of supports are we able to offer? We're able to have access to our landlord liaison team, so we're able to answer any questions about RLRA, the RMP, or anything relating to the RLRA program in general. One big thing that we get asked a lot is just like how to access the program, and that's through the coordinated entry system, as well as just other questions about the risk mitigation program, how to access that, as well as different types of claims that you could end up submitting. Another thing that we like providing is housing problem solving. Another way of thinking about it is just third-party mediation. We allow that for both our landlords and our supportive housing service providers. We get a lot of questions about like lease compliance is probably the biggest one, and we're able to support them to be able to ensure that our participants are allowed to stay in their housing and be able to prevent the eviction as the worst case scenario. Because the biggest goal at the end of the day is the successfulness of our participants. So another big thing that we do is resource navigation allocation, both through the risk mitigation program as well as other different parts of the RLRA program, which can be anywhere between housing navigation as well as like resources on like creating reasonable accommodations for our participants, as well as like and things like that as well. The final part about is the property partnership, and everything I listed above, anyone that within the RLRA system is able to access this. We highly encourage you to reach out to your landlord liaison teams if you ever have any questions. We're always here for that. But property partnership is a way to basically say thank you for being a part of the RLRA system and be able to offer you some exclusive incentives. The big part is barrier reduction. A lot of the supportive services go into reducing those barriers for our participants. And sometimes those barriers are insurmountable, especially in certain screening criteria. So one of our job is to be able to speak with landlords and maybe reduce some of those barriers to help engage. And I like using the word streamline the process for them to be able to find housing. And actually, I'll be able to talk a little bit more about the financial incentives that are included with our program. So if you end up signing up and becoming a partner with us, we have two different landlord and financial incentives. The first one's going to be the lease up incentive. So for every successful unit that's leased to an RLRA household, you'll be able to have a lease up payment, and this does stack. So if you have multiple units, you would be able to get each of these lease up payments for each of them. And then the other one that we have as well is we have this repair reimbursement incentive. And with Home Forward, they have to conduct an HQS inspection of the unit once it's been approved. And typically, the best way I like to explain it is the landlord will cover the first $500 of that expense, and then this incentive will cover the next 1,000. Thinking about it like almost like in a deductible. So the first 500 will be paid, and then we'll cover the next 1,000. And yeah, the biggest part while we're here as well is we do really treasure a lot of those relationships that we're able to develop. Like we said before, we really want to maintain as well as develop new relationships. I think sharing resources at these events is really important for to continue the work that we've been doing. And one of the big asks that we have as a landlord liaison team is we're looking for more properties. One of the biggest incentives that we have is we're able to market it directly to the service provider, kind of help support them during that housing navigation process, as well as laying out the screening criteria for some of these buildings, so they're able to get in as soon as possible. So any properties, we're looking for single family homes as well as large scale apartment complexes. We would love to sign with you and ask for more information. We do ask that you contact your local county offices. So even if you have properties in multiple different counties, you ask to reach out to each of those landlord liaisons teams, and we can coordinate some agreements to be able to partner with your properties. If you want to learn more, I'll skip the question slide. We actually have our contact information on the screen as well. Each of the counties also have their websites. If you look up our landlord liaison for this specific county, it should pop up. But the best way to reach out to us is going to be those emails and phone numbers on the screen. And yeah. We also have a little form right here. So if anyone's interested in signing up to become a partner today, you can definitely fill out one of these forms. And we also have a quick survey, just to help us improve our program and our presentations in the future. Yeah, thank you all for coming. Yeah, do you have any questions?
Oh, there it is. Hi. I realize this is the marketing was for choice and for market rate housing in the Tri-County area. I was wondering if you guys are tracking what percentage of the landlords are affordable housing providers versus market rate providers, and if there's anything built into the program that, at least 50% of the funds or whatever the X percentage of funds do get funneled to the affordable housing providers, which tend to have, I would argue, overall better infrastructure to support this client population in general.
First, to answer the data question, we do not track, well, when I believe the housing authorities in each of the counties would be able to get that information, but that's not being actively tracked to our knowledge. But again, ultimately the housing authorities in each of the counties really do kind of play that central role in that kind of the documents that we looked at, the RFTA, that request for tenancy approval, and then that RLRA contract. That's really kind of establishing the type of property, and so the housing authorities in each of the counties would have that data. Is it accessible and communicated though? No, not the case.
I noticed that your handout says that the average time from program intake to move in is 90 days. Do you have any idea how many people do not follow through and do not get housing because they can't find housing? Or do you know what that success rate is?
Hello. So for Washington County, I know across all three counties, we each have like the award letter. So the award letters are typically extended for 120 days. And if we have somebody who is struggling, their provider or even the tenant or applicant themselves at that time can reach out to us and ask for an additional extension. Washington County, because I'm not going to speak for you guys, but Washington County will do an additional extension for 60 days. So that means it's 180 days total. And I can say that, like, as the flyer says, most of our people are able to find housing successfully within that 90-day period. But I've had a very small percentage who've had to get closed out at 180 days. Like they'll typically fall between like the 90 and the 120 days. And then they typically find the housing. And that's, I want to say, in part because the payment standards are so high, it's that 120%. So it opens up the amount of the units that they're available to search for. And then with the landlord incentives added to that, it's been pretty successful on our end.
Specifically in Multnomah County there, actually this is tri-county-wide data, like whatever, only like 8-9% of participants are not in the program after a year. And we found that about a little less than 20% of those folks are actually moving into permanent housing off of a voucher, no longer on assistance. And then about 50% of those too, this is one of the areas where we're kind of trying to do some data improvement, is figure out where these other exits are getting to. We have about 40% of exits that we can't account for. That data may live somewhere within the HMIS system or within some notes at that specific, within like those case notes with that specific service provider. But that's really a kind of a focus, especially here in Multnomah County. We're really working on data improvement to be able to work on those connections.
I think my question actually kind of leads right off of that. So regardless of the initial application, so obviously most leases are standard 1 year. What is the recertification or requalification process? Are there different standards? Or is it kind of just, okay, you have this until you reach a certain income amount? Do you re-verify income? Kind of how that process works?
Multnomah County. So in Multnomah County, and I think this might be RLRA wide. Every 2 years, there's a recertification for the voucher. There was just a new program actually kind of created, kind of thinking about this exact situation of when folks are kind of ready to move on. And literally the program is called Move On, that they're kind of piloting right now to figure out, what does that look like for someone? What is that housing? What is actual housing stability look like? And what is that kind of that definition? And I don't know if anyone's really sort of landed on anything yet. But that is something that we're kind of actively working on, but there is a 2-year recertification. The kind of criteria that someone would need to be able to lose their voucher would have to be like, it's significant. Like there are, I think on the sheet, there's a percent for under 30% AMI. There's about 3-4% that are above 30% AMI, and I think even 1% above 50% AMI. And so we are starting, like I said, kind of noted earlier, that those supportive housing service providers are focusing on income generation for participants. It's kind of obviously very crucial to long-term housing stability. And so that is something that we're thinking about too. It's kind of that move on process.
Hi, we provide some resident services in light-tech communities. So I believe, the owners are probably looking into becoming partners in the program. But in the meantime, if we're working with residents that we know are facing eviction due to non-payment, what's the best way to get them connected to the program? And is it something that can be applied to help them prevent eviction and stay housed in their current situation? Or would it need to be applied to looking at, moving into a different unit?
So this is probably the most common question that we receive, is how can from property managers, property owners, resident services, how can my tenants get access to this housing assistance? And kind of as we talked about through the presentation, all of the referrals to RLRA go through coordinated access, coordinated entry in each of the 3 counties. You're probably very familiar with 211. 211 is the way to get referred into, and then there isn't necessarily a question we'll receive is, how do you apply for RLRA? There isn't necessarily just an application that anyone can go out and fill out. You have to be connected with that service provider first. And so the flow, call 211. Each county has an assessment tool that they will use to determine eligibility. And then from there, that participant or that person will get routed to a specific program, whether that be a rapid rehousing program or like RLRA for us. And so there isn't necessarily a way to get tenants direct access. What we always recommend is that if you know someone that needs assistance, you gotta call 211. You gotta just get in line. Because or else, yeah, you'll never get access to it. So, yeah.
Hi there. Yes, thank you all for being up here and the work you do. My question is sort of piggybacking on the comment around that $5,000 limit that maxes out at that particular rental property. And ties in with the comment around data collection. So I was wondering if the 92%, the program retention rate at 12 months tracks how many times that individual may have relocated, potentially after having maxed out at 5,000. So question, and then if the answer is a no, then maybe encouraging you to start tracking that data.
I can speak obviously on the actual RMP side of things. The claim volume thus far has not been high enough yet, where we have not yet seen. I'm pretty confident that I can say this, that we have not yet seen a claim made for the same household, the same voucher holder at a new property. That's not to say that it won't happen, but that has not happened. And I appreciate the comment about that tracking, because that is not a specific data point that we have talked about. But that could be a very worthwhile piece on the RMP side to track going forward. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, thanks. My question is actually about, one of them is about code entry, and is Multnomah, well, are the counties using, what are the assessment tools you're using? And are they being applied in a manner such that they are compliant with fair housing laws, for example, not discriminatory, is what I'm trying to say. And at what point is a person able to get access? I know several years ago for supportive housing, you had to have a VI SPDAT score of like 19 or something in order to even consider getting close to getting housing. So is that still such a high, that high barrier still in place? The other question I have is about with the risk mitigation funds, are those used in a way to encourage and incentivize the landlord to allow the tenant to stay when there's a lot of damage to the property, or is it used in a manner that avoids eviction, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Thank you. Thanks.
I can start with the second part of that. Yeah, that is part of the goal of the program. We cannot force landlords to apply. We can't we can't process a claim on their behalf. They or their property management representatives have to actually ultimately make the claim. There are a number of ways in which we are working with New Narrative, the counties and service providers to try to get that going more often, because that is one of the big goals of the program. But I will say, I can't give you a percentage off the top of my head, but right now, unfortunately, most of the claims we're seeing are post-tenancy. We are seeing some during tenancy, but we are actively working on more avenues, more outreach. We already do quite a bit of outreach, but more ways to engage and try to encourage that use of the RMP while somebody's still living in a unit.
And then in terms of the assessment tool, and so it's actually really at a really exciting time in Multnomah County right now. We previously the county was using the VSPDAT, but now they're moving to a new tool. It's the MIST is what they're calling it, I believe MSST. I'll admit I've only been in like one meeting about the new assessment tool, but what what the county has communicated to us is that they are really interested in moving away from the VISPDAT, as it's not a trauma-informed tool. It's not a tool that matches with the values of Multnomah County and JOHS. And so they are moving away from that tool in development of a tool that is simpler, less questions, less invasive, to try to kind of reduce and honor that low barrier idea of these programs.
Hello. Full disclosure, I've actually worked on the RMP program on this, so I'm asking a question that wasn't answerable when I worked on it, and I don't know if things have changed. I asset manage an affordable property, and we have many folks who are below 20% income and are unable to afford their rent, and so are facing eviction. Is it possible to refer them to the coordinated housing access line and see if they can get vouchers? And then that was question one. And then question two is, in affordable properties, what rents can we charge? I've heard from some folks at the counties, some counties say that you can only charge up to a 60% rents if that's what you're charging at the rest of your property. But I heard you guys saying market rents, so I didn't know if we could charge up to the payment standard, which is usually significantly higher than the 60% rents if it's an affordable property.
I can answer for the I can answer for the affordable rate and market rate. Washington County Housing actually has two rates. So we actually have an affordable rate, and then we have the market rate, which is the market rate is the standard rate where everybody goes out and searches for housing, and then there's a secondary rate, which is affordable, and that's the limit that they have to stay under.
So if we're an affordable property, we can't get it, right?
Correct.
I don't know if it's different. And then the second part of the question, I'm trying to remember.
Oh, if we have folks who are in danger of losing their housing, so we refer them in, even though they're currently housed, hopefully in order to maintain housing.
Yes and no. Recommend that just call 211. It's not a guarantee that they're going to get access to a program or rental assistance. There are, depending on the county that they're in, there are different nonprofits and organizations who do have some emergency rental assistance that you may be able to get access to, although that could also be just as challenging. Really.
Thank you.
I recognize that this might be a kick the can down the road question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. There's a sunset to this program, and so I'm curious what conversations have been had, if it's not extended, about how the program unwinds.
So this ultimately it goes a little bit beyond our, I'll say our scope. This is housed at Metro. In one of the recent Tri-County meetings, there's discussion about these dollars that we're using. And the discussion amongst the representatives was that we should assume that this funding is going to end. That we should make that assumption and kind of really try to focus on building structural changes into our rental assistance programs that we can have long-term takeaways from. And so, if this funding is around just for about the 8-9 years, what are the takeaways and what are the ways that we can make system-wide improvements to be able to come away with a better system and really learn lessons from this. They've talked about putting it up for a vote eventually. Obviously, this is political, taxes, and so want to be mindful of that, but that is kind of Metro's current thinking, is that this will sunset and end, and that we're going to focus on kind of system-wide improvements from these dollars. Question in the back, and then are we? I don't know how we're doing time. Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Let's get their steps in.
This is a question about eligibility, because I know at the very beginning you had mentioned, one of the requirements is either having previously used homeless services or, it sounds like being chronically homeless. But then also folks who are exiting the criminal justice system could also be eligible. I'm thinking about young people who who might be couch surfing or don't always connect with traditional homeless services. I'm also thinking about young people transitioning out of child welfare and OYA. I'm just curious, like, can you say more to that specific part of the eligibility and kind of what that looks like for folks who are transitioning out of systems?
Recently, actually, we've seen kind of a large uptick actually in the number of, especially of youth aging out of the foster system. And so that is a target kind of population that is increasingly being served by the RLRA voucher. It's right now, I think it's about 29% actually, just like right around a quarter of all people being served are in like the 18 to 24 age range. And in terms of that eligibility, if they don't have a permanent address or they're couch surfing or something along those lines, that would be something that would be captured in that assessment that we kind of talked about a little bit earlier, that each of those counties does that through their coordinated access, coordinated entry systems. That answer your question, kind of?
It does, yeah. So it just sounds like does answer. It just sounds like the long-term homelessness or utilizing homelessness services, it can vary.
Yes, yep. And it technically is even for people at risk of homelessness too. And so there is kind of a wide range in what that can look like.
And we also have some youth. We also have some youth organizations within Washington County. So like they have children, that come to their organizations that they're very intimate with and understand. And so they're typically putting those referrals in with the children, or some agencies are able to they have coordinated access entry and are able to go in and do the assessment for them also. And so that kind of helps them make sure that they're getting into this program versus like, it's kind of the same thing, like you were mentioning the incarceration, like they're working normally with an advocate within the jail system who's able to refer them to the correct agency to do that phase 1 assessment to make sure that they're getting into our services.
This is a follow-up from Liz's question about the affordable rate. Is it set at 60%? And every year, does it stay at 60%, or is there a set percentage, or is there an application process for rent increases?
Okay, sorry. I know that it totally, I think it's set at the 60% rate, but like that is like slightly above me because my boss is the one that gets all the information, then funnels it back down. But my understanding is it normally does hit at about 60%, but it also fluctuates with fair market rent. So if the trend goes up, then it'll go up. If the trend goes down, then it could go down.
And you just publish what the increase is every year? Okay.
Yeah.
You know what the trend has been in the last 5 years?
Well, I know that this year it went down.
Any other questions? Yeah, it's definitely, I'm getting close to lunchtime here. And so obviously, if you want to connect or ask any other questions, or we have obviously our cards and everything like that. So feel free to come and chat.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Some tough questions, and I'm glad I wasn't up there to answer them as the representative in Multnomah County. Sorry about the difficult question. I'd love to talk to the RLRA program more about rents, because I just had a conversation downstairs with. She's from Washington County. She is blind. She's on the outside. Thank you for your presentation. No, she mentioned me anyway. Okay. She was saying that it's great performance where people are including rents at 60% rather than final. She's like, obviously they should be the payments.